Welcome, everybody.
How's it
So
going?
it seems like StreamYard is going to be delayed on a lot. And if not, if it's me, then I can blame StreamYard and just apply that criticism.
Yeah, that
Welcome,
was weird.
Yeah, well, so for everybody that doesn't understand what we saw in the background, which, by the way, I have freaking Michael speaking something about quantum. I can't actually get him out of my ear, so I'm going to take this headphone out because I can just hear Inspiring Philosophy speaking in my right ear, and I don't want to hear it. It's hard to do an intro whenever you're doing that. So for people that don't know, whenever we start the show, there's some like little things that I got to get set up, and clicking them, you would expect them to execute when you click them, but they don't all the time. So sorry for the delay in that case. Cease, why don't you run down what will be going down for the show while I get Michael out of my ear and get the right video up for us to play.
Wait, are we doing the problem of evil one? Is that what we're doing? Because I don't even know what we're doing right now. We had like a bunch of clips, so we were trying to decide which one we wanted to do. I think we're doing the problem of evil one, right, Mike?
We are. He has ceased on his own. I guess I commanded him to stop. So,
okay, great.
So for people, we're trying to set up a video or a discussion on Friday with another inspiring philosophy about physicalism, and so that video that I had up that we were potentially doing today was just running, and so
gotcha.
that was really difficult to like start talking and hearing somebody be like, a lot of people think that physicalism is true, and I have really bad arguments on why I think physicalism is not true.
I'm gonna try to get my brother to come on either, I think he said Monday or Wednesday of next week, to do the show on physicalism. So
yeah, and I want to say that this is a metaphysical necessity. That I cannot stream without something happening. That's why, like, and I say this a lot, it's really good to have a crew behind you when you do like an ACA thing, because they mitigate a lot of those issues pretty easily. So we're learning. Give us some time. We're a little independent group at this. But as I get the video up, so we're gonna tackle. We haven't seen the video. It's like 50 minutes long, so I don't think we'll get through the entire video. We probably won't, like we normally don't. But we're just gonna tackle what we can in the time that we do. It's pretty much what we do.
I gotta just post this. My brother is now boring, and I'm gonna get him on Monday.
All right, so as I pull up the video,
I love my brother.
Do you think that you have any kind of just off the bat criticisms of specific problems of evil or theodicies given, or anything off the cuff that you want to say relevant to? Because it's kind of just, category of.
Yeah, I mean, the usual response is like, God gives us free will. Doesn't resolve the problem for me, because it's like, well, the free will for who? The murderer over the victim? Like, they're having their freedom infringed upon. Or when they'll say things like, well, you need the bad to have the good. Says who? Like, we could have a world where we still have choices, but now the choices lead to the kind of suffering that will be called evil. So aside from the fact that the free will response has no basis, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any reason to accept free will in the way that they describe it as an actual thing. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that a God is all powerful and all loving, and then say that he just watches suffering go by without intervening. And so actually, I had an interesting conversation on another show the other week. I think it was the Promethean Experience, or Secular Soapbox, I think it's
Promethean Frontiers, or Secular Frontier.
Yeah, I think it was like this bigger show. I think was like Secular Soapbox. I think is the name of it. I'm terrible at remembering names, but where I was talking to a theist who actually, interestingly enough, doesn't think that God is all powerful. He thinks that God is limited, and therefore he's all loving, but he can't intervene the way that he would like to. And so I think that makes a little bit more sense as far as a interpretation of God than one who's supposedly all loving and all powerful, but allows for evil. Um, then again, I
Um,
don't know how a creator of everything wouldn't be all powerful, but whatever.
sure. So what? So I guess before we would get into it, like, what do you? Um, so I've been talking a lot on Clubhouse, and one particular argument that's been rendered, um, that I don't know the, like, if it necessarily stems from, but somebody that I talk to, at least when I can, is Darth Arianis or Arrhenius or however you say it, and he renders an argument that's has to deal with like the just taking away kind of those omni properties and dealing with the infallibility of God, that he can't fail.
Hmm.
And so if you kind of accept the idea that God can't fail, and you accept the idea that if God desires no evil or sin in the world, but agree that there's evil or sin in the world, then it just follows that God failed at his desire. That is to say that there is an infallible, fallible God, right? Some
Yeah,
proposition in the conjunction of its negation.
I
And
mean,
so I don't know. For me, I find those. I find like the omniscient appeals to be like not necessarily easier workarounds, but it gets convoluted. Whereas if you kind of just display it in regards to never being able to fail to actualize the world that's logically possible, which most theists agree, then you don't have to worry about the all loving part. You just have to worry about what's constitutive of the actual desire, which is to not have sin or not have evil, right? So that to me seems to just kind of do more work, and actually get to the root of what the person accepts than convolute it with certain properties, because they
what
can
was
just apply some. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry? Who was the guy you were talking to? Because Ryan heard Dart anus, and I'm pretty sure that's not what you said.
No, I just always say the name wrong. Because I don't know. I knew I talked to him in Discord. He had a different name, but Darth Arianis or
Arianus.
Arianus or something. I don't know. I don't know. I just don't. I'm terrible with
The,
pronouncing shit until
the
someone
way
just tells
the
me.
way
So
out of the argument you just provided, I think would be something along the lines of, God desires for no evil, but not to the expense of, like I said, this idea of free will, right? Like the idea of, yeah,
I just saw
that's what I
that
thought you said.
comment.
Too.
I
Yeah.
saw the comment there. I wasn't looking at the screen. Sorry, I was trying to get the problem of evil video up.
Um, but yeah, like one could say, well, yeah, God doesn't desire evil, but he also doesn't desire for its creation to not have a choice in the actions that they take. So there is a way, I think, to navigate that
Well,
issue.
so then at that point you're just denying P2, which is like that God desires a world without sin. Because at that point you're just saying like God does desire a world with sin, constitutive that agents have the ability to choose that. That's why he gives it. And then you just run a different argument, or not a different argument, but you just show them what that means.
Well, it's not that he
Do you
desires, but it's not
but
that he
so
desires sin. He's just it's almost like uh, what's the word I'm
permitting?
saying? Yeah, it's like it's an
So
I guess
permitting the impermissible or something like
it's
that?
like a necessary evil where like he doesn't desire it, but it's kind of like a consequence of what
Sure,
is
but then
ultimately
does
preferable.
and so if it's a necessary thing that's necessary for the good, then and we just say that evil is what you ought not do and good is what you ought do, doesn't that just mean that now evil is coextensive with the good?
Yeah,
Or just to say that it's the exact same definition of what you ought
yeah,
do
but
as
but
good.
it's like
So then
saying
it's just that evil doesn't exist, and that's kind of the same argument that's been rendered,
well,
right? And
okay, let me
I find that argument to be extremely appealing in terms of its force, right?
Okay, well, so let me give you an example. That's a bad example. Hold on a second. Let's say that I want to be physically healthier. Well, that might require me to like work out, right? I might not desire the effort that it might take to go through those terrible workouts, but it's like kind of the means justify the ends, or the ends the other way around. The ends justify the means.
Yeah,
Um,
so the event should happen in order to justify the mean, right?
yeah, and it's not that I
So
desire
then
the
so then
suffering.
I know, but then it just means that it should happen. That's
Yeah,
kind of like the whole
yeah,
point.
no, I get
Yeah,
it.
right, so then it would be wrong to say evil is what ought not happen is kind of the idea, right? That would be just wrong because it would just be it'd be
Right,
contradictory to be like, well, no, yeah, I agree. It's something that ought happen for the greater good, but it also ought not happen. It's like,
right, right,
wait,
right,
what? Because what is it P or is it not P? Right?
right. No, I'm with you there. Right? Yeah,
So, and that's why I think that the force of it works because it depends. It's like fucking whack-a-mole, right? Like you think you get out of it by just saying, well, God desires, because what your original objection was kind of like a conjunction. It was like the way at least I interpret it was like, well, God allows evil and it's necessary for like this reason. But if
right.
that's the case, then the force of this argument works in the case that we're just talking about something that ought to be done for the
Ultimately,
greater
right, right,
good,
right,
right? And
right,
so, like, there's just no sense of like saying, well, no, it is P and it's also not P. Like, it also should not be done, but should be done because it's just
right.
like, what the fuck are you talking about, right? It just seems really incoherent at that
And
point.
like I said earlier, the free will response doesn't really work because you could have a God that gives us free will, but only to freely choose between good options. Like we can have a variety of options
Yeah.
where we're still making decisions, just none of them that lead to horrible suffering.
Well, so me and you both play music, right?
Yeah,
This is the way that I've come up with my own type of interpretation on it. So I think Darth used an example about like throwing a dart at a dartboard that he got from somebody, um, or that he said that he got from somebody named Dog, who I've talked to about. I think he denies like hypothetical imperatives. So I think he has like kind of a really strange view on that, but irrelevant. It's like I guess it's the idea is like that you could throw a dart right at a dartboard, but it's going to be the case that the world that's actualized is that you just can never hit like the direct center of it, right? But you still could like deliberate on actually trying to hit,
right.
the dead center of it. Um, and so that's sorry, now I'm forgetting your initial point. So sorry, because it
No,
was
no,
relevant. Now it's relevant. So what were you saying? I'm sorry.
no.
I had a brain fart.
The idea that God might not desire for evil, but sees it as an inevitability because he desires its creation supposedly to be free to make choices, which doesn't
Okay,
really make sense when you look at the God of the Bible anyway.
well, it doesn't make sense when you say it's infallible and it would just actualize that world at which
Right.
confers with whatever. Like so, like in the typical two examples is like heaven is precisely that world that's actualized where free agents just choose the good,
Right.
and then presumably like God himself is a free agent that can only choose the good, and so there's not like a something barring like logical possibility or something like that, right?
Mhm.
Um. Oh, I was talking. Now I remember what I was saying. Uh, the example that he used was about the dartboard and just never being able to. You could still deliberate on hitting the middle, right? But it's just going to be the case that you can't actually actualize hitting it, right? It's a world at which God actualizes that you can't hit it. And so the way that I look at the problem is to go, because we're both musicians. So if I'm to deliberate, like say I'm playing in like Phrygian or like Locrian or let's just say A major, right? Let's make it like simple. Blues will be a bad example because bad notes are good in blues. But if it's the case that I'm playing, and you're playing like a rhythm section and I need a solo over it and I need to play an A major, right? It's going to be the case that I have choices between like all 7 notes or whatever.
Mhm.
but I can't choose notes that are not in the scale.
Right. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And so deliberation between hitting that fret is still there. Right. I can hit A flat if it's the 4th fret, on the E string or something like that. I can deliberate hitting it. It's just going to be the case that I'm going to choose between one of the good options.
Right.
Now, Plantinga makes I think it's Plantinga makes a distinction that it's something about like a significant moral good or something is like it's going to be more valuable significant freedom is going to be like more valuable given like that you could actualize a choice of evil or something like that. And so Plantinga's argument kind of addresses at least the idea that free agents could always choose the good, but I guess it's the idea that it's more valuable, quote unquote, to have the idea that you could actually deliberate and choose evil, right? But to me, that seems to beg the question, or at least beg the question on a normative notion of what's valuable.
Right.
But anyway, we can get on to the video if you want. I thought I think that's a good precursor, at least into the thing, because a lot of at least the way that I tackle the problem of evil now is have had these discussions. And I was somebody that I didn't know that the force of the problem of evil was, and maybe in even other videos I said I don't really find the problem of evil to be that forceful, but I think I've changed my opinion on that.
Before we get into
I
that,
believe for different reasons. I've not believed in God for different reasons, but that's
let's get into the clip. But I just want to respond to this real quick. After 1.5 years of God talk on axioms, has it been that long?
Is it really? Wow.
I can't. That's crazy. Has the probability of God existing decreased? I mean, I don't think so. I feel like. Well,
I don't know.
maybe.
Well, I don't know, because if God, so it's hard for me. Like the probability is something that has no referent potentially.
Yeah.
Right. Because like if you're an error theorist about like moral values and you say, is it the case that a moral proposition true's probability has increased or something like that? The error theorist is like, it's just the case that the proposition is always false because it has no referent, right? Or something like that, or it predicates on nothing real in the world. And so like wrongness or rightness or something like that, the probability doesn't change because there's nothing existent for it to be predicated on. But
point being, I think I was already a pretty hard atheist like before starting axioms. And so I think the show, I guess it's decreased in the sense that I kind of looking at these things a little bit deeper for the show.
So like in virtue of like a propositional attitude.
Yeah, but right.
That makes, then I can understand that. Yeah.
But I think I'd already examined stuff like enough that, I think I'm more expressing what it is that I already knew, and by just putting it on the screen. So I don't know, but yeah, let's get into the episode. We're like 20 minutes.
We will. No, we are. You got to understand, for me and for other people that have watched us, we do videos at like 8 or 9, and I work really late, and so I'm really tired usually. So the more energetic I am, you'll probably see a trend that it's earlier episodes that we do. Yeah. So I'll get carried away. So that's more than likely my fault. I'm gonna go ahead and I guess not full screen the video because I can't maneuver. All right, so we will go ahead and share the video. Nope, that's not the right one. See, so why don't you do like a dance or something while I get this?
That'll never happen. Isn't it on here?
No, I just shared the wrong screen. That's my bad. Though this is a good time because we don't really mention this as often because we'll always do this regardless. But if you do want to support us, you can support us simply by just giving a subscription to us. That helps us. A like on the video, which I don't think we really ever say. But if you can give us a like on the video, that helps increase it. I really, though, when I say that, I don't really care about that in the aspect that I'm gonna talk if there's nobody even listening, so it doesn't really matter. But it definitely would be nice, to have something at the point of like benefiting monetarily, of course. And if you care about that aspect, then you can help us monetarily on patreon.com/axioms on trial, or by giving a donation or anything like that. So that's just to be said, not required. The subscription is free and it can be revoked at any time.
Either one of you just jiggle a little. They want us to do a dance.
Do a little jiggle. Yeah. So we should be good now.
There we go.
And I got the audio fixed. So the audio should not have an issue, though I'm going to test it to make sure. By the way, people, don't get frustrated. The beauty of YouTube is that you can fast forward through this, even though you don't know when to fast forward to. So you hear that?
I don't think I heard anything. Keep playing. Yeah, I hear it.
Yep.
The problem of evil is the most used and biggest objection to the existence of God. There is not a skeptic out there who doesn't cite the existence of evil as a reason God probably does not exist. And so we need to be frank.
So already I just want to say one thing. I don't think Michael's saying this, but like you would agree that like the problem of evil is just a category of potential arguments that you can make and referent to a problem of evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Because some people think like there's the cosmological argument or the problem of evil, and that's just not how that works. Like the moral argument, right? It's like, no, it's a category of arguments. I just wanted to.
This is a serious objection that Christians cannot simply overlook. And there are no answers to the problem of evil that can explain every horrible event. The reason
why I did want to say
what?
Sorry. I wanted to shout out. I can't find the name. I'll do it whenever I find it.
Why this is a persistent objection is because of the emotional sting that evil causes runs deep for mankind. Why does God allow so much pain and misery? Does God really love us if he can look down and see a child being tortured and not stop it? Any one of us would if we came across such a horrible act.
Wait, can you pause it?
The omniscient God does nothing and simply lets evil continue.
It was Briley, by the way, because I saw that they come in here. I've noticed their name, so I just wanted to shout them out. But anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, it's not just an issue of an emotional response. It's an issue of logical consistency with the terms and the definitions one is applying to describe this God. So it's not just, I'm like, it's not just an emotional reaction to evil. It's that it doesn't make sense to say that this God is all powerful and all loving, and then say that evil can exist in that way. So it's also like a rational thing.
Unchecked. Why? I've spent years researching this and have delayed a formal video on it because I wanted to take my time and give it a fair treatment. Again, this is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. But over the years of my research, I have come to the conclusion the only way to address the problem of evil is not just through philosophy, although that is part of it. Because the problem of evil stings emotionally more than anything else. I'm indebted to Clay Jones for this, but one cannot truly address the problem of evil without the message of the gospel.
Okay, so we're already in some weird territory. If the problem evil exists, then it can be explained by Christianity. So now we have and I gave the inference rule, so you're welcome. But presumably that's the inference rule that you're making.
Let's see what it says. I'm curious to see
what it goes. So I was gonna say, without giving a criticism, presumably there's a substantiation that the antecedent implies the consequent. If the problem of evil exists, then it must be explained by Christianity. And so if that's the case, that the consequent actually follows, then hopefully he delivers on those supporting arguments.
I don't think the problem of evil can be answered without Christianity, and I'll explain why later on. But first, we need to begin by going over what the problem of evil is and the different types of
Okay,
arguments.
I'm sorry. So now I'm thinking it's like a biconditional statement, right? So now it seems like it's the problem of evil can only be resolved if and only if Christianity is true, right? Does that not seem to be the claim that he's making?
Yeah, I think that's what he's
Okay.
saying.
So that's a biconditional statement that the problem of evil can only be resolved if and only if the Christian worldview is true. Cool.
Arguments. I would suspect the problem of evil has been used for millennia, but the logical problem of evil was famously given by the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, and is what most people think of when they think of the problem of evil. Premise 1. If God is all good, then he wants to stop evil. Premise 2. If God is all powerful, then he can stop evil. Premise 3. There is evil. Conclusion. Therefore, there is not an all-powerful and all-good God.
Okay, so thoughts about the validity and soundness of the argument. Do you want to tackle, validity first? It's the modus ponens.
Mm-hmm.
If God is all good, then if P, then Q. Presumably got the affirmation of the antecedent of God is all good, then follows the consequent that he wants to stop all evil. Doesn't seem to be contention. Do you think there's contention about the consequent there?
I think the argument makes sense. Like, obviously, I think it comes down to how ultimately we define good, right? Because Christians are just going to define good by whatever God decides to do. So even when we see evil, they're going to say, well, it's for the better. They're going to try to sidestep the issue, and they're going to kind of try to beg the question and say that ultimately what is good is what God says and does and decides to allow.
Is that so? The question I feel like then is that a normative notion, like that the good is what you ought to do and the evil is what you ought not do?
Yeah, I agree with this argument.
So would you say that if the Christian denies that it's a normative notion, then
like the argument here on the screen,
then it's like intelligible because I don't. It's like we've had T jump on here, but to me it seems to be like the T jump type of metaethical theory of like not having normativity, and then at that point I don't even know what's action guiding about that.
I agree with this. Like, if God is all good, then he wants to stop evil. If God is all powerful, then he can stop evil. There is evil, therefore there's not an all powerful and all good God.
Sure.
I agree with this.
Yeah, if P then Q, P therefore Q, if P then Q, P therefore Q. There is, or I'm sorry, then he can stop evil. So then there is evil, therefore it's not all powerful God, right? So then you can modus tollens the last part. Okay, so so then the last part's going to be if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. Well, I guess not powerful and all not good. So there's a conjunction. Sorry. Yeah, so you don't have any issue. I just wanted to stop it, see if you had any actual issues with it. I know it's like a moot point, but I'm just curious on your thoughts.
No issues.
However, this argument is not used by most modern atheistic philosophers.
Okay. The reason why this argument is not used by most atheist philosophers because you would agree there's a lot of different arguments you can propose about the problem of evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Because it ignored another important attribute of God, his omniscience. Being that God is all-knowing, he might in his perfect knowledge have very good reasons for allowing evil that we cannot see. Agnostic Paul Draper notes that some serious attempts have been given that show evil is logically compatible with God's existence. Specifically, he says Alvin Plantinga's free will defense has persuaded many. Plantinga says of his free will defense, a world containing creatures who are significantly free and freely perform more good than evil actions is more valuable, all else being equal, than a world containing no free creatures at all. Now, God can create free creatures, but he can't cause or determine them to do only what is right.
So, okay, this is nonsense. There's nothing. supposedly the only things God can't do is things that violate logic, right? That's usually the argument. There's no violation of logic in only making a creation that have the choice between good options. They could still be free to decide among a spectrum of good options and just never go into the category of evil ones. So that just doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
Sure. And so then it's just like the idea, I guess, that you're expressing is like if you want the problem of evil to have like a successive argument, then it does. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the word. Like it does elucidate that God wouldn't have some reason to permit the evil in the first place. Or something.
And to just say that, well, God is all knowing, so he just knows better, is just a way, just another way to sort of crystallize this dogmatic way of thinking, where any kind of clear objection to the inconsistency of the content of these terms gets sidestepped by saying, well, it's God, so I'm just going to trust that whatever God decides is the right thing. Like, just because you're, what's where he used like all-knowing, doesn't somehow, omniscient, doesn't somehow make the inconsistency of the terminology go away.
So, and that's precisely why I said earlier that I'm attracted more to the idea that, look, this. Well, so I'll give the criticism here in a second because I want him to finish.
For if he does so, then they aren't.
If I forget, the criticism that I want to raise is the infallibility problem.
Significantly free after all. They do not do what is right freely. To create creatures capable of moral good, therefore, he must create creatures capable of moral evil.
No.
And he can't give these creatures the freedom to perform evil and at the same time prevent them from doing so. As it turned out, sadly enough, some of the free creatures God created went wrong in the exercise of their freedom. And this is the source of moral evil.
So, and I guess this is the issue of like the infallibility thing. It's like if you think that God can actualize the world without the evil, then he's not going to fail at actualizing that world. But if it's the idea that he must create creatures capable of moral evil, then it's going to be the case that evil must exist in order for them to have some notion of the good, and therefore it ought to be done, which is just coextensive with what we mean by the good.
And
so
this is,
evil is some necessary good for a greater good, right? That's all that means.
But this is also completely contradictory to their own theology, where they claim that eventually we'll get to a place called heaven where there is moral perfection and there is no evil.
Precisely. There's exactly. That was what was touched on earlier. And what was raised too is that God is just a morally perfect being in and of himself that can freely choose. And so in either case, there's not like a bar that is like logically, so to speak.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Is if God is morally perfect and God can't perform evil, well, then there's an example of something that is only good and doesn't require evil for God to be good.
Yeah, and so I mean, precisely the idea that there would, like, in terms of like some modal possibility, if logical the modality of like logical possibility is what's on the table, then clearly there's no bar, right?
Yeah. See,
there's nothing barring God from.
And because God existed before anything else, and evil was secondary.
Sure, unless you want to say God's not sovereign over this one thing.
But he as a Christian, he wouldn't go there.
Exactly.
But see, this is what bothers me about these people, is that, like, he can make this, an hour worth, productions with, his, good editing and slides and fancy cinematography.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but none of that matters. He's appealing to people that already agree.
the content behind his videos for me
Right,
have
like-
always been so incredibly unimpressive, and yet he talks like he's some kind of authority. Like, I don't have, like, I'm sure that he's a nice guy enough. Like, I haven't seen him be particularly, um, I, I've seen a lot worse Christians online, right? But there was something about
we had that conversation. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
relatively, but don't let relative notions get in the way of.
But there's something about the way that he approaches conversations, and there's a sense to me of inflated ego when I watch his videos,
And that's why I say don't let like relative notions of how other people behave poorly get in the way of an issue that's independent of that,
yeah.
Because I would agree. I have like nothing against Michael as a person in that sense. I just think like he expresses like the exact issues with holding to this proposition being true, and like the type of things that you'll do.
See, I
Right.
feel like I don't speak with authority on things that I mean, he would say the same thing. Like he said, "Oh, I've researched this and I researched that," but he's researched these things supposedly, but already with a bias of trying to prove his own intuitions right. So he's already going into it, trying to, I've
Well,
gone
yeah.
into
No,
what
no, I
I've
mean-
done without
go
any
ahead.
kind of, like, even when I have an intuition, that's not. I'm trying to prove myself wrong, if anything. Like, I'm trying to really get to the bottom of what I think actually makes sense.
Well, would you agree that if I pointed out premises that you commit to and then what it entails, that would present a problem that you want to revise?
Yeah.
Right. And so
Anytime
that's the issue, right? Like, it's just that this is the problem of evil expressed, at least in certain ways, are going to be based on the fact of premises that person accepts, right? Otherwise, like, it, if you just say like God's not all good, then clearly, like, the argument doesn't matter, I think, to you.
Like,
right?
I've gone into getting my degree with certain ideas in my head of belief system that I had, and I got smashed by my peers. Some of those things, some of those beliefs have remained because I came up with, I think, good responses, but I had to refine my views, and
or see what went wrong with the objection, or
yeah,
something like
yeah. But some of those views that I held, I had to get rid of in light of the evidence that was provided and the arguments that were provided. I just don't see what any of what he says actually, how that resolves the problem. Like, he's just saying things that if he really had done the research he's talking about, he would be addressing, and he's not addressing here. He's just going to the usual boring
Well, I mean,
free will.
you don't think that this graphic of like morally good with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and then like morally evil 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people is like just like illuminating for everybody what's going on here? But you don't
Anyway,
think that
keep playing. I can't believe we're
Yeah.
only in like fucking 3
we're only
minutes.
3 minutes? We'll try to shut the fuck up if we can.
The fact that free creatures sometimes go wrong, however, counts neither against God's omnipotence nor against his goodness.
Yes, it does.
For he could have forestalled the occurrence of moral evil only by removing the possibility of moral good.
No.
Paul Draper notes,
Okay, so
I mean, even if that was true,
I tried to say that and we already paused it fucking 2 seconds later.
Even if what he just said was true, then you couldn't say that God was morally perfect. Like,
Well, that's why what matters to me is the idea of it just not being able to fail at its action.
I mean, I agree with the idea that we have to be able to compare and contrast certain states. Like, yeah, to understand what it means to flourish.
Well, no, but no, we don't. But look. Could an infallible agent not give you a priori knowledge, or at least just some knowledge of what it would be like to deliberate and so? Let me tell you this: could an infallible agent fail at making a world where when I take my mom out to dinner, or take her out to the movies for her birthday, presuming it's a restaurant that she wants to go to and a movie she wants to see, and they're both the good options, right? Could you not actualize a world where I deliberate putting rat poison in her popcorn, or like putting like, my foot out to trip her on her way to her seat or something like that, and deliberate on what it would be like to actualize that scenario? Right? An infallible agent wouldn't fail at actualizing the ability for a free agent to deliberate and understand the outcome of the action, and thus make the decision to go with the moral good, because the free agent just chooses the moral good.
Two quick things. One, I'm going to respond to this. Evil requires intent. Is that correct? I'm actually not. I think it's not that simple. Because I think people can. I think most of what I mean by evil.
I think so.
See, in general, when I'm talking about evil, I'm talking about certain kinds of suffering, the state of being in a certain kind of suffering. And so it's possible to cause somebody suffering without.
You're saying a causal disposition like a tornado it could still be evil, even though it lacks intentionality. It's just a causal disposition of what it could do.
But that seems counterintuitive, because when we think of evil, we think of somebody intending to do harm.
It's a normative notion of what ought be done or ought not be done. Yeah, precisely.
So my point though is that
that's the issue.
I do think, but even something like intention is based on like kind of neurological events that the person that does the action isn't ultimately really in control of.
Well, would you ask, or would you say that like intentionality is constitutive of the idea that you could fail or succeed in your goal of your intent?
I think intentionality matters in the sense that it's one way in which we judge a person on a moral scale. So if somebody...
Wait, only a moral scale though? Because like if I desire to get ice cream, which is like amoral, the reason why I raised this is because you have intentionality getting an ice cream, which is an amoral, potentially let's just say moving a rock to the left or the right. I intend to move the rock to the left. It's like amoral, right? It's not going to affect anything, but it's still the idea that I could fail or succeed in my deliberation to move it to the left or the right, depending on what the goal was.
I think this is where it kind of gets a little bit muddied, because I do think that
we might get into our issues on philosophy of mind here.
I wouldn't call a natural disaster evil, although ultimately, as a naturalist, I think everything is ultimately physical. And so it's a matter of a certain kind of configuration of matter results in consciousness. And so in some sense, a tornado is made up of matter, and the things that lead somebody to make a decision that we would call evil is still ultimately a physical chain of events.
But so the only thing, because it seems like you're saying is that certain causal dispositions aren't evil, but a certain specific variation of causal dispositions are evil. But but then it seems like the property that's analogous is that they are causal dispositions, and I don't know like where the normative. This is going to get into our meta-ethical issue. That I don't know. I don't know where the normativity lies in some like causal, disposition. But that's
before we move forward, I just wanted to add one example. Is obviously if somebody kicks a cat, but by kicking the cat accidentally saves the cat, but it's his intent or her intent was to harm the cat, well, we're going to judge that person differently than someone who kicked the cat out of the way of an oncoming car on purpose to save its life, right? Like, we're not going to judge, even though the results may be the same, that the cat was saved once on purpose, once by accident. The cat still survived, but we would judge the people differently because their intention was different. So I'm not a pure consequentialist.
I was gonna
Like,
say that seems, if you're a consequentialist, that seems to just be an issue for you.
so I would say I'm not a pure. So that's why I'm saying I'm not a pure consequentialist. I think most of what I'm referring to are the consequences of behavior on mental states, but there are other factors that are valuable in the way in which we judge somebody's morality. It's not just the consequence, but it's also, because by knowing somebody's intentions, it's how we protect ourselves from future situations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah. I mean, I don't want to dive into our because
There's
we're
a lot
getting
there.
at we're getting at some certain seeds of disagreement that regardless I can still see why that would make sense from the kind of meta-ethical view that you have. But anyway, we'll go on. For those that don't know, I'm an anti-realist and he's a realist, so we have different views in that respect. But for the most part, I feel like we're on a.
I'll be right back. But
No worries.
Keep playing.
In order for a logical argument from evil to succeed, it is necessary to show that, for some known fact about evil, it is logically impossible for God to have a good moral reason to permit that fact to obtain. This, however, is precisely what most philosophers nowadays believe cannot be shown.
Okay, so I want to try to unpack that. In order for a logical argument to succeed, okay, so a logical argument from evil succeeds if and only if, given some fact about evil, there's a contradiction for God to have a good reason to have ought to have had a reason to allow the okay. Okay, so the way I'm unpacking this is really weird. So an argument from evil succeeds if and only if, given some fact about evil, there's a contradiction derivative from God having ought done or have ought permit something that ought not happen. That's the way that I'm reading that. Am I off on that? Let's try.
No, you're good. You make sense.
Okay,
just give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
No, you're fine. Let's try to formalize this. Okay, so sorry for everybody that's bearing with me. So we're gonna look at this, and I'm gonna go P1. Logical problems, and I'm not like extremely competent on logic. This is my infancy of formulating, but logical problems of evil succeed if and only if. So IFF.
Okay.
If and only if.
That's crazy.
Given some fact about evil.
How did we get rid
of that? Logical problems of evil succeed if and only if, given some fact about evil, it is logically contradictory. Sorry, I just really want to formulate this. Logically contradictory that God, if good, and I'm just saying, if good is what ought be done and evil ought not be done, that's what I'm trying to say. So logical problems of evil will succeed if and only if, given some fact about evil, it is logically contradiction that God ought to permit that fact of evil.
I just want to respond to this real quick.
what
begin-
ought not be done. Okay, sorry, I have it formulated. So, logical problems of evil succeed if and only if, given some fact about evil, it is logically contradictory that God ought to permit that what ought not be done. Does that not seem contradictory in and of itself?
Yeah.
Or am I, because like I'm willing to just say that I'm off, prima facie. I'm just not looking at that right, but that seems to be an issue in and of itself. Like, right? Like, is it contradictory that God ought to allow what ought not be done? What?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense that God would
What
have
the
like
fuck?
what more reason could there be to allow for somebody to get raped? Like that just doesn't make any sense. And to then this is just an evasion of the problem. It's saying, well, God is, we see evil. Well, God is morally, God is all knowing. So there must be a reason that it's allowed, as opposed to seeing the reality of existence as being evidence that this notion of God they have is inconsistent. It's just an evasion of the observations. And real quick, I just want to answer this. What if I have no
Seriously,
intention?
anybody in the comments, let me know if I'm wrong on this. If I'm just being rash, because I'm. Anyway, go ahead.
What if I have no intention to hurt anybody, but I enjoy seeing people suffer? Aren't I still evil? Yeah, I think this is where the intuitions get muddied, because I would say, ultimately what is evil are, causing somebody to suffer, but certainly you're not, somebody like that is not going to be as morally good, at least in a hypothetical sense. I think if there's a spectrum of what makes somebody a moral person as opposed to an evil person, someone like this isn't going to be as low on the spectrum as somebody who actually puts it in action to cause suffering, but they're not going to be as morally on the good side as somebody who doesn't put it in action or likes seeing people suffer. So, I think you're muted, Mike.
For anybody that's more competent in like propositional logic or anything like that, just let me know if there's an issue. I really don't want to steel man, but like this is the way that I interpret this. In order for a logical argument for evil to succeed, it is necessary to show that for some reason about fact, it is logically impossible for God to have a good moral reason to permit the fact to obtain. And so if evil is precisely what ought not be done and good is what ought be done, given that we're talking about some normative notion of the good, that seems to just be logical problems of evil succeed if and only if, given some fact about evil, it is logically contradictory that God ought to permit evil. That what ought, or I'm sorry, I think I worded that wrong. If and only if, given some fact about evil, it is logically contradiction that God ought to permit what ought not be done, not that what ought not be done. Sorry. So isn't the contradiction just that God thinks what ought not be done is God thinks that what ought be done is what ought not be done?
Right. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Damn, this is entertaining.
And so the free will defense succeeds in showing it is at
Does it?
least logically possible for God to exist alongside evil. Because it might be the case a world with free will and evil is more valuable than a world with no free will and no evil. And thus William Rowe has to admit there is a fairly compelling argument for the view that the existence of evil is logically consistent with the existence of a theistic God. What most atheists argue.
Yeah, you're muted.
Wouldn't be a show without it. Given that the God, so there's a fairly compelling argument for the view that the existence of evil is logically consistent with the existence of a theistic God, consistent with the God that wants evil and not for a greater good.
argue today is the evidential problem of evil, which today is where the real debate is, because it is a probabilistic argument. It argues that given the amount of evil in the world, it is unlikely an all-loving, all-powerful God exists.
No, it's not.
As Paul Draper says,
Yeah.
Premise 1, gratuitous evil exists. Premise 2, the hypothesis of indifference, i.e., that if there are supernatural beings, they are indifferent to gratuitous evils, is a better explanation for one than theism. Conclusion, therefore, evidence prefers that no God, as commonly understood by theists, exists. Perhaps Sam Harris explains the issue of evil in a far more relatable way.
Okay, thoughts? Oh, so before your thoughts, I don't think that the evidential problem of evil is as compelling as the logical problem of evil. So I
Yeah,
have
yeah, but
you on that. So but go ahead, because
and
that's
also
all.
what he said is that it's not about it's unlikely. It's that it is inconsistent. With the terminology, it's not an issue that the problem of evil makes it unlikely. It just doesn't make sense in the ways in which these terms are described for the omni-properties of God to be what they are, because they are inconsistent with what we see in the world. So I don't see why now he's making an issue of probability rather than just an issue of definitions.
God, as commonly understood by theists,
It's
exists.
echoing.
Perhaps
Echo. Sorry, my headphones got unplugged.
Sam Harris explains the issue of evil in a far more relatable way. Somewhere in the world, a man has abducted a little girl. Soon he will rape, torture, and kill her. If an atrocity of this kind is not occurring at precisely this moment, it will happen in a few hours or days at most. The girl's parents believe at this very moment that an all-powerful and all-loving God is watching over them and their family. Are they right to believe this? Is it good that they believe this? No. The entirety of atheism is contained in this response.
I wouldn't say the entirety.
As you can see,
It's for me. It's not about I just don't care about the examples as much as I care about what it's just agreed upon that God desires and his capabilities to prevent it.
Right.
Right. It doesn't have to it doesn't matter about the propositional attitude of an agent or something like that. That's just, to me, it seems to be appeal to consequence or something. But none of that. If I go through suffering or something or I don't, that's going to be irrelevant whether or not the argument succeeds. Right. I just don't get that point to me.
The issue many skeptics have is, given the amount of horrendous evil in the world, how can an all-loving God allow this to happen, especially if he has the power to stop it? Surely it is far more likely there is no such God. The issue itself has to be addressed by looking at what moral evil is. It cannot be brushed over as mere hardship. To put it,
this is why the offer of what ought not be done works, but we'll see what you have to say.
Bluntly, as C.S. Lewis said, the Christian answer that we have used our free will to become very bad is so well known that it hardly needs to be stated. But to bring this doctrine into real life, in the minds of modern men, and even modern Christians, is very hard.
The answer is garbage. The answer is not an answer.
Are you saying that the Christian answer that we've used our will to become very bad is so well known that it hardly needs to be stated, but it brings the doctrine of that answers anything. The idea is, okay, what does it mean to do evil? It means that it's something you ought not do. It's typically what people mean. I think most people agree with that, and that's why the argument's successful, because that's just what, look, is it evil for me to know God exists and choose against him? Yes, right? I ought not do that, right? That's the same exact proposition. It's coextensive, like to say that evil or ought not something that ought not be done is that case.
But again, but the free will example fails because it's only looking at the free will of the murderer. Like the victim is having their free will imposed upon. So why is the free will that matters, the one that wants to do the harm? And again, why can't you just have the freedom to choose, but only choose between good options? It's, I mean,
okay, I think I'm seeing your objection now. So your objection is because I was unpacking it differently the first time I heard it. So you're saying like the notion of like being able to choose evil for the agent takes precedent over the fact that like there's just this resulting victim
who's having their freedom infringed upon.
Exactly, in virtue of that decision being constitutive of having a free choice.
Right. So why would that matter more?
When in reality, there's the alternative that you're saying. Why does that matter more than the alternative?
Yeah, because somebody's freedom,
that's actually a really good argument.
Somebody's freedom always gets impaired in this context, and so why isn't it better to impair somebody's freedom in their ability to choose evil than to impair a victim's freedom to have their autonomy, inflicted upon by somebody who's choosing to do evil? Like, and again, ultimately the background, or what it comes down to is that these responses are inconsistent with their own theology. Like I mentioned earlier, they believe that there is a state of existence in which evil can't take place, and they call that heaven. So it's not like they're contradicting themselves at every turn and just not realizing it.
Yeah, the first part so the second one is precisely what I offer. The first part that you said is something that has really got my ears perked because of like the notion of God's deliberation being predicated on the person being able to do the good over so like, because you're saying like, look, God has the free choice here to actualize this world, and then it chooses like what's more valuable is the idea that an agent could choose to like rape the victim, and then that's just exploiting the fact that God thinks it's more valuable for somebody to rape the victim.
Yeah, like that makes no sense.
Like, I'm sorry, I'm just starting to like unpack what you're saying. I'm like, that's insanely like, if I'm hearing that right, that's insanely damaging.
Yeah.
Really look at what evil is, and I'm not going to hold any punches back or give a cheap account, so viewer discretion is advised. The reality is, the atheists are right, that our history is filled with insurmountable, horrendous evil.
All right, guys, thank you for tuning in to Axioms on Trial. The atheists were right. We're done. Sorry.
The reality we all have to face is genocide is not inhumane, despite that little lie we like to tell ourselves. Genocide is very much human. When the Bible says humans are totally depraved, it is meant to be a very serious claim. Matt Dillhunty and many others have argued the Bible is an evil book that poisons our minds. Telling us we are totally depraved is a horrible thing to say.
Okay, hold on.
What?
Did you say Dillhunty?
Insurmountable, horrendous evil. The reality we all have to face is genocide is not inhumane, despite that little lie we like to tell ourselves. Genocide is very much human. When the Bible says humans are totally depraved, it is meant to be a very serious claim. Matt Dillhunty and many others
did.
have argued the Bible is an
Matt
evil book that
Dillhunty.
poisons our minds. Telling us we are totally depraved is a horrible thing to say and degrades us as humans. Well, that would only be true if the Bible was lying and we are not actually depraved. If I was suffering from narcissism and you told me I was a narcissist and needed to get psychiatric help, that would only be a horrible thing to say if it was false. If it was true, then it might have been the best thing you could have told me, because you would want to see me get help and overcome my mental disorder. So if the Bible claims that we are totally depraved, we ought to test that against reality, and it will help us better understand what moral evil is. What I'm about to go over will be a hard pill to swallow, and it will take some time to unpack, because once we understand human nature, I suggest the problem of evil falls into context. See, we like to think of ourselves as further along than our primitive ancestors, who engaged in genocide, rape, and torture.
By the way, all things that the Bible condones at different parts. So,
CJ, I mean, you can go back if you'd like. I mean, we've pretty much rendered the infallibility type of argument that Darth Arianis runs, and why I think that's a much better argument than appealing to like other properties.
Yeah.
And then we went into some argument that like the argument of evil can only exceed if and only if like there's a contradiction for God to allow, or for God to allow what ought not be done, right? For him to do what ought not be done. And that was interesting. And yeah, so we kind of showed that if something ought to be done in that case, then it's just coextensive with the good. And if it ought to be done for the greater good, then you're not saying anything that shouldn't be done. You're saying things that should be done. But yeah, so definitely go back. I think this has been a good episode to listen back on.
But there have been more people murdered in the past 120 years than any other time in our history. The 2 world wars gave humanity an up-close look at some of the most brutal acts humans have ever committed against their fellow humans. The Nazis rounded up Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, the handicapped, Polish, Ukrainian.
Does homosexuals matter to you? Curious on his thoughts on that as a Christian.
And many other groups they deemed unworthy. They ripped children from their mothers, and they murdered children in front of their parents. They made their victims walk in horrible death marches, forced them into sweltering rail cars, and then made them travel for days without...
You know what's so funny about this? And the one point that, like, not the one point, but the one point, because since he brings up Sam Harris in his response, the one Sam Harris point that's absolutely relevant to this, that Sam says in a debate, absolutely relevant, is that if had Yahweh commanded everything he's saying that's atrocious to be done, and that's constitutive of his properties or his commandments for the good, Michael would not be arguing against it.
Right. Yeah, which is why religion is ultimately has a psychopathic component to it, because it basically makes excuses for these things as long as God decides that it's the right thing to do. Like he calls the Holocaust a horror, which obviously it is, but when God floods the world and kills the entire world, basically, that's fine because it's God who decided to do it. So it's just this why religion is evil.
That's another thing. It's like I really love like the exploitation of like what ought not be done in this case that actually should be done. It's just the case that there's no evil in this view. seems to really point out this kind of like issue that even if like, so when the Christians just like, but you're, you know, you're a subjectivist, and it's like I can actually make sense of evil, whereas like it's just constitutive in your view that like the guy that throws the grenade ought to have thrown the grenade to create the hero. You know what I mean? That saves the family.
Yeah.
It's the case that Pontius Pilate ought have sinned in order to create Jesus, you know, on the cross to like die for salvation. It ought be the case that I'm born with, you know, as a filthy rag of sin in order to be my sins be washed away for with Jesus, right? That is something that ought to be done in that case. There can't be evil. And it's hilarious to me because like if you try to undermine like even an anti-realist or subjective view about the good in that case, like I have much more of an actual basis because it's predicated upon actual attitudes and desires I have, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like yours is predicated, even if I assume the God exists in the case, to be predicated on notions that everything just ought to be done, right? Every event ought to be done in order for the fruition of God's plan.
Right.
It's insane to me.
Let's see what else he says.
Without food or water. People would defecate, urinate, and puke all over each other in these rail cars.
Yes.
All to be taken to death camps, where they were painfully exterminated with poisonous gas. Reports from guards talk of people in the chambers climbing over each other to try to claw their way out. They knew everyone was dead when the screaming...
This time I'm not cutting off Michael. I just want to I feel like me and CJ sometimes are just like, we're just locked in. Like almost every criticism I feel like I have, CJ says it before I say it, or articulates it a little better than I can, or then says what I said after I said it, and I know he was typing it as I was saying it. So I just want to give a fucking shout out to CJ because he's awesome.
Stopped. The Nazis also performed gruesome experiments on young children, where victims were put into decompression chambers, drained of blood, or sewn together. The worst part was, most of the young men who carried out these killings and tortures were average people from Germany drafted into the military. We have identified over 10,000 camps, ghettos, and brothels the Nazis set up. Many of the so-called unfit were forced into slave labor for Volkswagen, BMW, Bayer, and many other companies. So it is not like the Germans did not know what was going on. The German population knew early on Hitler wanted to exterminate those he saw as unfit, and most did nothing when he started rounding people up. And worst of all, many joined in and helped him. Was this inhumane? This was completely human. Of course, it is sadly obvious to any student of history, Japan was probably far worse than Germany. The horrors they brought...
Okay, so... I don't know what, like... So, like, like, what's being addressed, like, citing all the horrible things is, like, already kind of baked.
This is just him filling up time in his video. This is what he does. He throws a lot of information at you, most of which is irrelevant to what's actually being said, and then he makes a non sequitur, and that's the video. Like that is 90% of his YouTube channel.
Well, I mean, I'm glad that at least he got the substantive parts, or the relevant parts, like out in the beginning, that we could, because I felt bad that we spent as much time as we did, on that. But we're coming to an hour and 17, and I got to do a quick little meeting thing. So I guess let's stop it here and come back to either this one or the physicalism
upon the Chinese people.
Because he's not really, I don't know how much more time I have to listen to something that's not relevant to the argument. It's a 55-minute video, so
we didn't get through a lot of the video. I mean, we can, probably go back to it.
We can definitely go back. I'd love to go back. The Problem of Evil is one of my favorite things. I'm gonna cut it short because I need to hop into a meeting real quick and then go to bed. So I'm gonna do that. But Cease, do you want to kind of give a little? I've shared enough of my thoughts, so I would just be expressing the same things I said. If you want
No,
to
I
know
mean,
what I said, just go back. But for you,
same here. I mean, it just kind of feels like all the things that he's describing as horrible and very human are things that basically, you know, God more or less does versions of it in the Old Testament. And yet he has no problem calling this stuff evil when it's a person doing it. But if it's God doing it, then it's okay because God is, according to his definition, it's like he's just defining in principle God as being perfect in whatever he does or thinks or whatever.
yeah, whatever problem exists is just going to be constitutive of his perfection or something like that, right?
Which is, I think, to me, to completely do away with any kind of meaningful definition of the terms good and bad and that we could have in the first place.
Yeah, which is why, and CJ had mentioned as well, if we just say that evil is what ought not be done and good is what ought be done in terms of some normative notion,
Yeah.
Given that they agree with that, given that it's just permissible for God to allow evil or something, that notion, like, and that it ought to be done for the greater good, then it's just, like I said, coextensive with the good or synonymous with the good. So it's just going to be the case that it ought to be done for the greater good. And then we're just talking about something that ought to be done, right? It's just contradictory to say that it's something that ought to be done, but also ought not be done, right? That doesn't make any sense.
I would say, just for fairness,
I mean, you could be pessimistic idealism and give like a really long esoteric thing that I don't understand about it with a bunch of variables that he needs to. Not saying he's not saying anything that's not expressive, but you could give the argument, but you'd have to actually elucidate on what you mean by it.
I would say, to be fair, let's give this a part 2 and see if he actually does go anywhere with it. I don't think he does, but I think if we're going to do a breakdown of his stuff, I think it's more fair to go into what is the rest of the video.
Sure.
And then on Monday or Wednesday, I'll have David come on. And
I just wanted to like shoot at pessimistic idealism because he came in here, so it's nothing too harsh. It's just that like I don't. It's just simply that he could be conveying things. I'm a simple man.
To be fair, I have a degree, and half the time I struggle with understanding his terminology. So, like I said before, I would love to have him back on. And
I agree. No, I really am not dogging him. I figured he would understand that. I'm just giving him shit.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so
we'll conclude here, and for everybody, we really appreciate it. I'm glad that we're getting back on a schedule to be able to do this more consistently, and we'll be doing potentially an episode tomorrow and Friday, because I think I'm good for tomorrow and I think I'm good for Friday. So we might have 3 episodes. If not tomorrow, then expect us on Friday for sure. So we love you and appreciate you very much, and expect also a live episode with both hosts in the same room for the first time coming soon, barring some crazy event that happens that prevents it from happening. But
just real quick, I just want to respond to this. He writes, if evil simply one ought not to be done, then evil becomes almost trivial. One ought not eat all the cake if no one else had a piece. Clearly it's not evil, but it's not polite either. Well, I think ought here is in the context of a certain kind of suffering. We are referring to a certain kind of situation. Like, you can have something that you ought not to do that may not be, like, for example, how I build a bridge is not a moral question, but there's a way to build a bridge and a way not to build a bridge. So you can still apply oughts in that sense. But this, we're talking about a certain kind of ought in a certain kind of context. So ought here has to be specified.
It seemed ironic the fact that it would say it's trivial to pose that objection, because that objection seems trivial when taking the fact that is it the case that evil ought not be done, right? It's all that's trivial. Do you agree evil ought not be done, or do you think it's
we just have to separate?
You have a couple options, right? You could be like, it's not normative, right? Or it ought be done, or it ought not be done. All right. So tell me what it is that you think, and we go from there.
I think we just have to differentiate.
Why convoluted, right?
We have to be aware of the fact that oughts can take place in different types of contexts. Some are moral ones, and some are more like a different kind of.
That's fine in the context provided, or something. Right, that's fine. But even then, like, if it's just the case that when we talk about a normative notion of what ought to be done, seems that you have a couple options. You say it's not normative, or it is normative, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Which one is it? It is normative. Okay, so then it ought not be done, or it ought be done. Which one? It ought not be done. Okay, so then we wasted a bunch of time, right? Yeah, we did. Okay, cool. So it's a bad objection then.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to...
Unless you just want to say it's a non-normative notion of the good, and then cool, my left foot is what the good is, or impositions of will, my stated preference that I don't want to pay for a beer. You know, I tell the bartender, hey, I want a beer, and he goes, that'll be $5.99, and I say, well, that's an imposition on my will. I don't want to pay for the beer, right? But normativity doesn't matter. Right, that's what then we're just in like the T-jump meta-ethical school.
All right. Well,
all right. Anyway, so and that's no shade on T-jump. I like T-jump. It's just I like to talk shit about people I know who I disagree with. Cease, moral anti-realist piece of shit. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, guys, this is taking a little longer than it should. We love you. Peace out.
see you next time.
See you next time. Peace.